The morning mist clung to the Afghan mountains like a shroud, hiding the deadly game that was about to unfold. Staff Sergeant Maria Santos crouched behind a cluster of jagged rocks, her rifle steady against her shoulder. The Barrett M82 felt like an extension of her body after 3 tours in this unforgiving terrain. Her breathing was controlled, measured, just as her instructor had taught her years ago at Fort Benning. Maria had been tracking this particular group of insurgents for 6 days. Intelligence reports suggested they were planning an attack on a nearby village where American forces were conducting humanitarian aid operations. The lives of dozens of civilians and her fellow soldiers hung in the balance. What made this mission different was the enemy's composition. 8 highly trained fighters who had been causing havoc across the region for months. The radio crackled softly in her ear. "Phoenix, this is base. We have eyes on your position. The target group is moving through the valley approximately 2 clicks from your location. Be advised, these are not ordinary combatants." Maria adjusted her position slightly, scanning the valley below through her scope. The terrain was treacherous, a maze of rocky outcroppings, sparse vegetation, and deep ravines that provided countless hiding spots. She had chosen her position carefully, high on a ridge that offered multiple escape routes, while providing clear sightlines across the approaches to the village. Her spotter, Corporal Jake Matthews, lay beside her with powerful binoculars. "I've got movement at 10 o'clock, he whispered. "Looks like they're using the old goat path." Just like we predicted, Maria shifted her rifle toward the indicated direction. Through her scope, she could make out figures moving with military precision through the rocky terrain. These weren't amateur fighters. Their movements were coordinated, disciplined. They advanced in a staggered formation, using cover effectively and maintaining proper spacing. 8 confirmed, she reported quietly into her radio. They're approximately 800 meters out and closing on the village perimeter. The response from base was immediate. "Phoenix, you are cleared to engage. Rules of engagement are weapons-free. These targets pose an immediate threat to civilian populations." Maria felt the familiar calm that settled over her before every shot. It wasn't coldness, it was focus. Each of these fighters represented a threat to innocent people. The village below housed families, children, elderly people who had already suffered enough in this conflict. Her job was to protect them. And she was very good at her job. She studied each target through her scope, noting their equipment and positions. The leader was easy to identify, a tall man with a distinctive beard who was directing the others' movements with hand signals. He carried what appeared to be an advanced communication device, probably coordinating with other cells in the area. The wind was minimal, maybe 3 miles per hour from the east. Temperature was rising as the sun climbed higher, which would affect bullet trajectory over long distances. Maria made mental calculations automatically, adjusting for all variables. At 800 meters, she needed to account for bullet drop, wind drift, and the slight upward angle of her shot. "Jake, what's the range to the lead target?" she asked her spotter. 790 meters and holding steady. Wind is light and variable." Maria's finger found the trigger. The first shot would be crucial. It would eliminate the leader and throw the others into confusion. But it would also announce her position. She would have seconds to engage multiple targets before they found cover or began returning fire. She centered the crosshairs on the lead fighter's chest. Her breathing slowed to almost nothing. The world around her seemed to fade away until there was only the rifle, the target, and the space between them. This was the moment that all her training had prepared her for. The Barrett M82 roared, its massive .50 caliber round cutting through the mountain air with devastating precision. The leader dropped instantly, his body crumpling behind a boulder. The other 7 fighters immediately scattered, their coordinated advance dissolving into chaos as they sought cover. "Target down," Maria reported, already tracking her next shot. 7 remaining, dispersing to defensive positions. The hunters had become the hunted, and Maria Santos was just getting started. Years of training, months of preparation, and days of careful positioning had led to this moment. The 8 rangers who had been terrorizing the region were about to discover that they had walked into the crosshairs of one of the deadliest snipers in the United States Army. As the echo of her first shot faded across the valley, Maria was already calculating her next move. 7 targets remained, and each one was now aware that death was hunting them from the high ground. The real test was about to begin. The remaining 7 fighters reacted with the training of seasoned combat veterans. Within seconds of their leader's death, they had disappeared into the rocky landscape like ghosts. Maria knew they would be trying to determine her position, while simultaneously working to flank her. Time was now her enemy, as much as the fighters below. Through her scope, she caught a flash of movement near a dried creek bed. One of the insurgents was attempting to use the natural depression as concealment while advancing toward her position. Maria tracked the movement, waiting for a clear shot. Patience was crucial. A missed shot would give away her exact location and potentially allow the remaining fighters to coordinate an effective counterattack. "Jake, I need eyes on the ridgeline to our east," she whispered to her spotter. "They'll try to get elevation on us." Corporal Matthews shifted his binoculars. "Copy that. I'm scanning now." Maria's radio crackled with an update from base. "Phoenix, be advised that friendly forces are still 20 minutes out. You're on your own until then." 20 minutes might as well have been 20 hours in this situation. The fighters below were undoubtedly calling for reinforcements or trying to coordinate with other cells in the area. Maria needed to end this quickly, before the tactical situation deteriorated further. A muzzle flash erupted from behind a large boulder, approximately 600 meters away. The bullet struck the rocks near Maria's position, sending fragments of stone whining through the air. The shooter had gotten close to marking her position. Too close. "Contact left," Jake reported. "I can see the shooter's position, but he's well concealed." Maria pivoted her rifle toward the source of the incoming fire. The fighter was using a classic sniper hide, positioned behind cover with only the smallest opening for his weapon. It was a difficult shot, requiring her to thread the bullet through a gap barely larger than a dinner plate at 600 meters. She controlled her breathing, feeling her heartbeat steady. The crosshairs centered on the small opening where she had seen the muzzle flash. This shot required absolute precision. Any deviation would result in the bullet striking solid rock, and her position would be completely compromised. The Barrett spoke again, its thunderous report echoing across the valley. The .50 caliber round found its mark, and the enemy fire ceased abruptly. Through her scope, Maria could see the fighter's weapon lying abandoned in the rocks. "Target neutralized," she reported. 6 remaining. But her shot had given away her general position, and the remaining fighters were already adapting. She could see movement in multiple locations as they began a coordinated advance using fire and movement tactics. These were definitely not amateur fighters. They were executing a textbook assault on a fixed position. "Maria, we need to move," Jake urged. "They're going to bracket our position with covering fire and assault from multiple directions." Maria was already breaking down her shooting position. The Barrett M82, despite its power, was heavy and cumbersome for rapid movement. She would have to transition to her secondary weapon system for the mobile engagement that was developing. As if reading her thoughts, automatic rifle fire erupted from 3 different positions below. The bullets sparked off rocks around their position, forcing both soldiers to seek better cover. The insurgents were laying down, suppressing fire while their teammates maneuvered for better positions. Maria and Jake low-crawled backward from their original position, using a natural fold in the terrain to mask their movement. The heavy rifle made the going difficult, but Maria's conditioning allowed her to maintain speed while staying below the enemy's line of sight. "New position, 200 meters back," Jake reported as they reached a cluster of boulders that offered better concealment. "This gives us multiple escape routes if they get too close." From their new location, Maria had a different perspective on the battlefield. She could see 2 fighters advancing up a gully on the eastern side of her original position, while another was working his way around to the north. They were executing a pincer movement, intending to catch her in crossfire from multiple directions. The closest fighter was now only 400 meters away, and moving with purpose. Maria knew she had to disrupt their coordinated advance before they could execute their plan. She selected her target, the fighter advancing up the eastern gully who appeared to be carrying a radio, probably coordinating the assault. This shot would be taken from a different angle and elevation than her previous shots, requiring new calculations for bullet drop and wind drift. The target was also moving, which added another layer of complexity to an already difficult shot. Maria tracked the fighter's movement, predicting where he would be when her bullet arrived. She led the target by several meters, accounting for his speed and direction. Her finger tightened on the trigger just as the fighter paused to coordinate with his teammates over the radio. The third shot found its mark with devastating effect. The fighter collapsed, and Maria could see his radio equipment scattered across the rocky ground. The remaining 5 fighters were now operating without their primary means of coordination, which would make their assault much more difficult to execute. But Maria's position was now thoroughly compromised. The fighters below had triangulated the source of her shots and were already adjusting their approach. Muzzle flashes erupted from multiple positions as they attempted to pin her down with suppressing fire. "Time to go," Jake announced, already gathering their equipment. "They've got our position dialed in." Maria took one last look through her scope, searching for targets of opportunity. The remaining 5 fighters had gone to ground, using the terrain expertly to mask their positions. This engagement was about to become a deadly game of cat and mouse among the rocks and ravines of the Afghan mountains. As bullets whistled overhead, Maria prepared for the next phase of the battle. 5 experienced fighters remained, and they were angry, desperate, and closing in on her position. The advantage of surprise was gone, but Maria Santos had other advantages: superior training, better equipment, and the tactical high ground. The question was whether those advantages would be enough to see her through the fight of her life. Maria and Jake moved quickly through the rocky terrain, using every piece of cover available as bullets snapped through the air around them. The 5 remaining fighters had spread out in a wide arc, attempting to surround their position and deny them any escape routes. It was a tactical situation that could deteriorate rapidly, if not handled with precision and speed. Movement on the ridgeline. 9 o'clock, Jake reported breathlessly as they reached another defensive position. 2 fighters. Maybe 300 meters out and closing. Maria could hear the distinctive sound of boots on loose rock, echoing from multiple directions. The insurgents were no longer being subtle about their approach. They were committed to an aggressive assault, probably hoping to overwhelm her position through coordinated fire and movement. Setting up quickly behind a massive boulder, Maria scanned the approaches through her scope. The terrain that had initially been her ally was now working against her. The countless hiding spots that had concealed her from the enemy were now providing them with covered routes to advance on her position. A figure appeared briefly between 2 rocks on the northern approach. Maria swung her rifle toward the movement, but the target disappeared before she could acquire a clean shot. These fighters were experienced. They knew how to use micro-terrain to their advantage, exposing themselves for only seconds at a time. The radio in her ear crackled with an urgent transmission. "Phoenix, this is Overwatch. We have aerial reconnaissance inbound. Can you mark your position?" "Negative," Maria replied quietly. "Too close contact. Any marking would compromise our location." She needed to think tactically. 5 fighters against 2, with the enemy holding the initiative and superior numbers. Traditional doctrine would suggest that she should withdraw and call for reinforcement, but the village below was still vulnerable. Every minute these fighters remained operational increased the risk to civilian lives. Suddenly, automatic rifle fire erupted from the eastern approach. The bullets struck the rocks around their position with deadly precision, forcing Maria and Jake to press themselves against the ground. The shooter was skilled, placing his rounds exactly where they needed to be to keep the defenders pinned down. While the eastern shooter maintained suppressing fire, Maria could hear movement from the other directions. The remaining 4 fighters were using the covering fire to advance on her position. It was a classic infantry tactic, and it was being executed with military precision. "Jake, can you get an angle on that eastern shooter?" Maria asked through gritted teeth. "Working on it," Jake replied, low crawling toward a gap in the rocks with his M4 carbine. "Give me 30 seconds. Maria knew they didn't have 30 seconds. She could hear the footsteps getting closer from multiple directions. The insurgents were closing the net, and once they achieved fire superiority from close range, the engagement would be over. Making a tactical decision that went against every principle of sniper warfare, Maria abandoned her concealed position and moved to higher ground. The Barrett M82 was designed for long-range precision shooting, not close-quarters combat. But it was the weapon she had, and she was going to use it. Climbing quickly to the top of a large boulder formation, Maria exposed herself to enemy fire, but gained a commanding view of the entire battlefield. From this elevated position, she could see 3 of the remaining fighters advancing through the rocks below. They had been invisible from her previous position, but from here, they were clearly exposed. The first fighter was only 200 meters away, moving through a narrow passage between 2 large rocks. At this range, the massive .50 caliber round was devastating. Maria's 4th shot eliminated him instantly. But her muzzle flash and exposed position immediately drew fire from the other fighters. Bullets cracked past her head as she tracked to her next target. A fighter, armed with an automatic rifle, was attempting to gain a position where he could bring effective fire on Jake's location. Maria centered her crosshairs and squeezed the trigger. The 5th shot found its mark, and the threat to her spotter was neutralized. 3 fighters remained, and they were now fully aware of her elevated position. Muzzle flashes erupted from multiple locations as they attempted to suppress her with coordinated fire. Maria dropped back behind cover as bullets sparked off the rocks around her. 2 targets moving on the southern approach, Jake reported over the radio. I can't get a clear shot from here. Maria repositioned quickly, knowing that staying in one place too long would be fatal. The remaining 3 fighters were experienced enough to coordinate their fire and movement, and they were getting closer with each tactical bound. Peering around the edge of her rocky cover, Maria spotted one of the southern targets. He was advancing rapidly, using a series of boulders for concealment. She tracked his movement, waiting for him to appear in the gap between 2 rocks. When he emerged, Maria was ready. Her 6th shot echoed across the valley, and another threat was eliminated. 2 fighters remained, but they had learned from watching their teammates fall. They were being much more careful about exposure, moving in short rushes and using every piece of available cover. Maria knew that time was running out. These final 2 were close enough now to assault her position directly if she didn't eliminate them quickly. The sound of approaching helicopters reached her ears. The cavalry was finally arriving, but whether they would get there in time was questionable. The 2 remaining fighters had to know that reinforcements were coming, which would make them either more desperate or more likely to withdraw. A movement caught her eye on the western approach. One of the remaining fighters was making a dash for a position that would allow him to flank her elevated position. It was a bold move, but it exposed him for the few seconds Maria needed. Her 7th shot was fired almost instinctively, the result of years of training and countless hours of practice. The bullet found its target, leaving only 1 insurgent alive on the battlefield below. The final fighter was the most dangerous. He had watched 7 of his teammates fall to Maria's rifle, and he knew exactly what he was up against. Rather than attempting a direct assault, he was being patient, waiting for her to make a mistake or expose herself. Maria scanned the terrain below, searching for any sign of movement. The silence was almost more unnerving than the gunfire had been. Somewhere in the rocks below, a skilled and determined fighter was hunting her just as she was hunting him. The helicopters were getting closer now, their rotors beating a steady rhythm across the valley. Jake had repositioned and was scanning the southern approaches with his binoculars. The tactical situation was stabilizing, but that final fighter remained a deadly threat. Then Maria saw him. A muzzle flash from a concealed position nearly 500 meters away. The shot went wide, but it revealed his location. He was positioned in a natural hide among some large boulders, with excellent concealment and multiple escape routes. This would be her most difficult shot yet. The target was partially concealed, at medium range, and clearly experienced. Maria steadied her rifle, controlled her breathing, and centered her crosshairs on the small portion of the fighter that was visible. Her 8th and final shot rang out across the valley. Through her scope, she watched the last insurgent fall, his weapon clattering against the rocks. The battlefield fell silent, except for the approaching helicopters and the sound of her own heartbeat. All targets down, she reported into her radio, her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her system. 8 confirmed eliminations, Threat to village neutralized. As the helicopters circled overhead and friendly forces began arriving on the scene, Maria Santos allowed herself a moment to process what had just happened. 8 highly trained fighters had entered the valley that morning, intending to attack innocent civilians. None of them would be leaving. The whispered warning from the Rangers had been accurate. 8 were indeed here. But they had underestimated the skill and determination of the female sniper, who had been waiting for them in the mountains above. Maria had eliminated every one of them solo with her rifle, protecting the village below, and adding another chapter to her already legendary service record. In the years that followed, the story of that morning in the Afghan mountains would be told and retold throughout military circles. It would serve as a testament to the power of superior training, tactical patience, and unwavering dedication to protecting innocent lives. But for Maria Santos, it was simply another day in the service of her country. Another mission accomplished in the endless war against those who would harm the innocent.